It's my absolute pleasure to introduce our next speaker, JustinCastilla. He's going to be talking about the There and Back Again by ferry or I-5. Sounds like an adventure.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. My name is JustinCastilla. I am a developer advocate at Elastic. Elastic is a data store, so we do full text, keyword search, vector stores as well, hybrid search, re-ranking, things like that, all the good fun stuff. But the main topic is not actually about Elastic, which is nice. As an advocate, I should talk about Elastic, but I really love when I don't have to. I can just advocate for good code. So, there and back again, but by ferry or I-5, an exploration of agentic AI components through the lens of a Pacific Northwest commuter. Does anybody take a ferry on the regular? Nice. I live in the Kitsap Peninsula. I grew up there, and I used to take the ferry every single day. I took the 4:50 a.m. ferry to get to Seattle Central Community College. It was rough, and I learned a lot of patience and to not worry about rain. It just happens. So you get soaked, but it's really nice to sleep on a ferry. Does anybody know what ferry terminal this is by chance? I wouldn't expect a lot of people to have just aerial memory. I think so. You know, I always look at this. I think it's either Anacortes or Bremerton. Or not Bremerton, I'm sorry, Bainbridge. But yeah, I think you're right. It's really pretty. Anacortes, of course, is the gateway to the San Juan Islands. Okay, so my biggest existential threat to my life is how do I get to my events without stress? I live in the big, beautiful Sasquatch-laden woods. I come out every once in a while to go to conferences, events, meetups, concerts, hang out with friends, things like that. But there's a lot of different options for me to get from my lovely cabin in the woods to where we are now. And to give you a bit of an example, here are some commute options that I have. So I could go around. I can take I-5 through Tacoma, through the Narrows Bridges, and then all the way up through the S-curves into Seattle. I can do a hop, skip, and a jump to Southworth Terminal. I can go to the Bremerton Ferry Terminal. I can go all the way through Bainbridge, take the ferry terminal through there. Or, if I'm feeling real froggy, I can go all the way up to Kingston, cross over to Edmonds, and then travel down south. These are all the legitimate options that I have. This morning, I woke up at 5:30, and I was faced with this. How do I get from my house to Bellevue College within a timely manner without being overstressed through traffic, things like that? So everybody's like, well, why don't you just use Google Maps? It shows that you can take a ferry. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. But for some strange reason, Google Maps does not consider the ferry schedule. And so if you look at Google Maps and it tells you to go to Fauntleroy to get to Vashon Island and you drive on over to Fauntleroy, well, guess what? You have to wait 2 hours. So that's a bit of an unfortunate disconnect that I wish Google Maps would actually figure out. Kinda, otherwise I no longer have a talk. But what I built was an MCP server that actually looked up ferry times, drive times, my events, my event locations, and actually did all of the work for me of looking at multiple different websites to compile different options. Any given day, I might be totally okay driving around, you know, if it's no traffic, if it's gonna be super early in the morning. But if I'm gonna be driving around on Super Bowl Sunday or could have been the World Series, there's gonna be a lot of traffic. So I didn't wanna do that. I could take a ferry, but sometimes that just takes too long or I have to wait too much. So there's a lot of different nuances that I have to think about. Also, what's my vibe? What's my mood? Sometimes I don't just want to drive around. Or sometimes the location is just awkward, so it doesn't make sense to take the ferry. So what I wanted to do, and this is kind of like an overview of how to build an MCP tool. How many people here have already built out MCP tools, things like that, agentic AI? Okay, that's really, really good, because I'm going to actually be showing you and sharing you how I built this out. And this is kind of a snapshot of my first MCP tool. I've iterated over it, but this is the square one first step into building an extremely powerful agentic AI system. I do believe that MCP servers are the first step. So I gathered all the information that I need to actually build out my solution. I want to get drive time, so Google Maps API. Washington State Department of Transportation has a fantastic API, and it's free. I mean, it should be. And it gives you all the information you need to know about getting from A to B in Washington. So not just drive and traffic delays, closures of passes, ferry schedules. I think you can even download images from the camera on the ferries, so you can see like, oh, is the ferry at dock or not? And then also I can connect it to my calendar. So my Google Calendar, I can also sync with my Elasticsearch instance that stores all of my calendar events in my data store, or I can just have my LLM connect directly to my calendar. In this case, I'm going to be using Claude Desktop because it's easy to prototype and get up and running, and I'm not going to run my own separate agent when I'm constantly talking with Claude Desktop. So here are all the things I gathered. My calendar is the time, location, Bellevue College. Got here at 8:39 to make sure I'm all settled in, got my coffee. Description, speaking, there and back again by ferry. And then also the Wizdot API, I want to know what terminals are near me. I want to know when they're sailing next, if there's any delays that might be occurring, things like that. And then Google Maps API, my origin, which is in Port Orchard, and then my destination, which is going to be Bellevue College. So once I have all of that information, I'm going to start creating some stories. I'm just going to write some simple stories of what I would do to actually figure out my commute. There's a lot of different ways of doing it, and I basically partitioned the Pacific Northwest, Western Washington, into two sections, the Kitsap blob and the King County blob. And I apologize to anybody who lives in Snohomish County. As you can see on the right, I kind of globbed you in there to include Edmonds. And then within the Seattle area, I created a larger subgroup, because a lot of the meetups I go to are in downtown Seattle. I should actually expand that to Bellevue. But enabled to let the LLM know that if my location is within the corridor between Bellevue and the water on Seattle, I can take Seattle ferries. That's basically what I did here. So I just sat there and I just wrote out some simple functions that I do on the day-to-day. Wake up in the morning and I look at the ferry schedules. I wake up in the morning and I play with Google Maps to figure out my commute. Or you do this the night before, right? I'm going to get there at 8:45 a.m. tomorrow. What time do I have to leave? Well, you leave at 7:35. Okay, cool. All these functions are written out. They take in all the parameters that you expect, origin, destination, maybe get there by a certain amount of time, things like that. So ferry cost, as an example, I would put in, I have a standard-sized car. I'm not driving my big rig. I'm not taking a motorcycle or anything like that. Search events is simply a search query where I can put in things like, show me events within the next week, show me events where I'm speaking, show me events that are about robots. All these different keyword searches are also blended with hybrid search, with vector search, so we'll go over that a little bit. But basically just write out all the functions that you would use to transfer over to your ideal MCP server, your ideal agent. And then you basically write a server and then give all these functions to the LLM and say, good luck, figure it out for me. So this is the stack that I'm using to actually create my MCP server that helps me commute. So Python is, I'm going to argue, basically the native language for agentic AI. The MCP server framework is built on Python, and then the fast MCP framework that I use is a subset of the MCP library. And I really, really enjoy fast MCP because it's constantly updated. It has a lot of support for the larger LLMs, and it just works really, really well. I use Elasticsearch, of course, because if I used any other data store, I would get fired. But I appreciate it because I can store my documents. It vectorizes and embeds them automatically for me, and then I can run semantic search on my descriptions. And then lastly, I wrapped everything in a Docker container. FastMCP recommends that you use UV, and that's totally fine. But I found that integrating MCP servers on different machines, the best way to get consistent results is to use a Docker container. And for larger services like multiple agents all working together, having them all in the same application folder, just a Docker container works better. So I stick to Docker. How many people, when they first heard MCP, immediately thought about Tron? I knew there'd be like at least 2 or 3 of us. So this was the big baddie from the original Disney Tron back in 1982. So no Daft Punk, no Jared Leto, thankfully. Just this big, awkward CGI squished out face. And I was like, oh no, we're making MCP? Like, it was just a matter of time. They finally have us. So MCP, just a little bit of history about it. It's a framework made by Anthropic, by one of their engineers, that wanted to provide tools to Claude. And it's a framework, but at its heart is a set of protocols and specifications. And those are agreed upon with different frameworks. So there are about 5 or 6 total components that you'll use, but the 3 most important ones are resources, tools, and prompts. The other ones are specific file access, complete actual instructions to use an LLM to execute the other components, things like that. But the one I'm going to talk about are the resources, tools, and prompts. So MCP basically allows LLMs, ones that you use day-to-day, the big boys, so ChatGPT, Claude, or the ones that you have specifically within your company. If they have access to MCPs, you can use anything you really want. And it is kind of a hot thing right now. Agentic AI, as far as like building out full agents, is kind of overtaking it, but I will argue that agents should have, and use MCP servers within them at all times, just because it makes sense. Okay, so I'm going to go through resources, one of the components of MCP. They basically represent static data or content that the server would need. So if the LLM wants to look up, in this case, a list of all the ferry terminals, you can see right here I am decorating an mcp.resource with a URI, transit:/ferries/terminals. This is the actual specification for resources. So this gives the LLM some affordance that what they're going to be finding are terminals for the ferries. You can also do this with like users/profiles. You can see below the resource templates. We see that we're actually putting in dynamic parameters. So I want to look at ferries/terminals/terminal ID/schedule. Ooh, got intense. /date. So now you can see from there, I'm passing in, or the LLM is choosing this resource and is passing in terminal IDs, maybe the Bremerton ferry, and the date, so maybe today. And that will return the schedule for Saturday, which is different from Friday. So it does actually make a difference. So resources and resource templates are major static sources of information. So they're not going to actually change or alter anything. They're not going to do a thing, they're going to show a thing. And this is an example of a resource tool definition. You see up top here, we have @MCP resource. We're passing in the URI, a name, so ferry terminals. That's just going to be a name that's listed and available to the LLM. And then under that, and very importantly, is the description. So a list of ferry terminals and their associated code numbers. So this is going to be viewed by the LLM in their decision process of whether or not to actually call this function. And one of the things that makes me so happy about this framework is this function. It is a relatively straightforward function. It doesn't do a lot of anything. It's simply setting up a URL for the Washington State Department of Transportation, and it's adding my API key, and it's looking up the terminal basics all the way at the end here. And it's just going to get all the terminal data. That's it. It will return it, and then that data will be returned back to the LLM. Can now the LLM search the web and just do a Google search for ferry terminals in Washington State? Yes, but I cannot guarantee that that LLM is going to get the exact same results over and over again. Sometimes it's going to go a little hairy, and it's going to start looking up San Francisco ferries, Staten Island ferries. I have seen this happen before. So actually creating your own static route or static resource guarantees that they're going to get the correct data. Also, a lot of websites are actually blocking LLMs. So it's no longer robots.txt, it's AI.txt, where they're saying, no robots. Just as we heard earlier on the keynote, like Amazon is really, really angry when you have agents going through it. So this way, it just works. And you can also do internal resources as well. This is just an API call. You can also do your internal data stores, your lookups, and things like that. So next we have tools. Now tools are where things get really fun, dangerous, exciting, cutting edge. They give the keys to the castle, the keys to the car, to the LLM. So you can send a request that actually makes changes. So if resources were, say, like a GET request when it comes to REST, this is going to be a POST. Okay? So this is actually going to create new information. This is going to change something. Or it's actually going to compile information to get something new. One of the challenges of tools and resources and prompts is that the LLM just has to do its best guess as far as what to give to these tools and these functions based off of the parameters. So what we recommend is using Pydantic. Pydantic strong typing ensures that you're going to get the correct parameter type, because LLMs will try to just throw everything into a dictionary, throw parameters into lists for some reason. They're volatile. And giving a Pydantic parameter list or parameter set will make it a lot more consistent for your tools to be called. So once this tool is called, it just simply returns whatever you want it to return back to the LLM. So if you're asking for a tool to, in this case, look up an event, it will look up any kind of event that I have in my, my data store. If you're asking it to create an event, it can also do that. If you're looking for it to purchase tickets for a certain concert, not a problem at all. If you wanted to make a reservation for the Anacortes ferry to Lopez Island, or from Port Townsend to Coupeville, you can absolutely have it do that for you. So this is going to be the tool definition under the MCP framework. So we have the create event under the name. And with the description, you see just create a new event in Elasticsearch. That easy, at least to write it down. And in this create event, I pass in an event doc, which is just a dictionary. And then I call Elastic to index and create that. And then I pass back to the LLM the event ID and the actual event that I got back from Elasticsearch. And again, this can be replaced with any other data store. So LanceDB will be absolutely happy sitting here. But of course, I recommend you try Elasticsearch, of course. And then lastly, we have prompts. Now, prompts are really interesting and really cool. They are exactly as they sound. They are prompts and instructions that you can give the LLM. So if there's a complex activity that you want your agent to perform, creating a prompt will actually help it. It will see this prompt as an available tool to call or function to call. It will execute it, and it will get back a set of instructions on how to do a certain thing. So if I'm giving it an enhanced directive to get me up to Vancouver. So sometimes I have meetups that I speak at in Vancouver. That's a little bit more of a trip than just hopping over to Bellevue. So I actually have to make a decision. Do I go up through Port Townsend, through Whidbey Island, through Fidalgo Island, up, and then finish up 5 all the way up to the border? Which border crossing should I choose? The main civilian one or the commercial trucker one? Things like that. Spoiler alert, I actually take the ferry up. It's just so much faster. All right, so this is a prompt. Again, you see that at MCP prompt with the name and description. So these are instructions for finding a route with buffer time before event time. So I'm going to get there 30 minutes before so I can check my email. I can make sure I have connectivity on my laptop, things like that. And you'll see that it is a function where it has origin, destination, event time, buffer minutes. These are all parameters that I can pass in, and then it will be trickled into the format string, and it'll be returned back to the LLM. So the LLM is going to get this set of instructions. The starting location is Port Orchard. Find the 2 nearest ferries from Port Orchard, and find drive times to them. Determine the arrival time to the destination terminal to Bellevue College. Find times that get the user to Bellevue College by 30 minutes before 10 or 9 or 8 a.m. These were all dynamically created, and then it's sent to the LLM. The LLM now has that in its context, and it kind of follows these rules to actually execute the other functions, the tools and the resources. So a little bit more about FastMCP. We saw it in action. Well, we saw it in theory. We'll see it in action in a little bit. I really, really like it. As I was developing with it, the actual versioning was going up and up and up, so I actually had some breaking changes as I was coding, which normally would kind of piss off a developer, but I thought it was really cool because they're actually making really good changes that I thought that they should have. And I was able to actually communicate with some of the developers to kind of give me a heads up of what they were working on. So this is just the MCP server side. With every server, you need a client, right? So there are MCP clients. And that's when you actually code out the implementation that connects your LLM to communicate with an MCP server. I recommend Claude Desktop because it already has its own MCP client built in. Same with your Claude Code. Same with Cursor and Windsurf. They all have MCP servers within them, and DeepSeek and VM Studio. Yeah. So one thing that I want to kind of level set is that MCP is a part of agentic AI. What you build when you have MCP servers with your LLM is one agent. So having them communicate is just simply using a communication protocol between 2 LLMs. So MCP servers provide tools and a means to empower the LLM. So instead of them just deliberating tools to commands to other LLMs, this actually gives them the muscle to execute things. And LLM agents, they should have MCP servers. I've built out multiple agents to demonstrate this, but there's no other reason to not have them. Because MCP servers, they are separate, so you can work on them independently of your agent system. And A2A, I'm going to call that out. That is the protocol of communication between agents. That was created by Google. It is adapted by Crew AI, LangGraph, LangChain, the Microsoft kernel. So these larger groups that are creating the agentic frameworks, they use A2A, which is nice because you can build your different agentic frameworks together and they can still communicate. So Crew AI and LangGraph and the Google's ADK, Agent Developer Kit, will actually communicate with each other. Okay, whew. That was a lot of description, a lot of promising, a lot of talking this up. This is an MCP tool, an MCP server that contains two different servers. One is purely for looking up ferry terminals, scheduling and helping plan a commute. And another one is a very simple Elastic server where you can create and search events. Most companies nowadays will provide you with their own MCP server, which is really fantastic. Because one might argue the onset of agentic AI and MCP tools are going to surpass APIs. With FastMCP, you can put a wrapper on top of your Fast API or your Open API documentation, and it will implement an MCP server on top of it that will execute those functions. So it's not like you have to do a lot of retrofitting to actually make this work. Okay, so let's get this started. Here I have Claude Code. And under Search and Tools, I want to point this out. These are all tools that already exist for you that you can use, so web search. I'm going to turn that off just to demonstrate that I am actually using the MCP servers. These are the MCP servers that I have. So within Kitsap Commute, I have all these different tools: find nearby ferry terminals, drive time, get ferry times, and then ferry cost. And then within my Justin's events, good naming, I can search events and I can create an event. And you're not limited to all your tools. You can do as much as you want. So let me ask you a question. Are there any events about fake money made by overheating my laptop? What am I talking about? Yeah, how dare you say that? Who knows? So I'm going to do that because I'm going to demonstrate that it's going to run semantic search, hopefully. Very dramatic. So hopefully it will execute a search of my events. There we go. Oh, cryptocurrency mining. What a cool idea. I didn't even think about that. All right, so you're going to see it's going to search my event, which is a function. It's going to pass in description query, cryptocurrency mining, Bitcoin, Ethereum, digital currency, blockchain, computer processing. So this is the actual LLM breaking out synonyms for just me describing, cryptocurrency. It's thinking. So we are contacting the Elasticsearch server, and it is going back to the LLM. Okay, here's the response. This is the raw response that I got back from Elasticsearch. It is consumed by the LLM, and there we go. Bothell Blockchain and Web3 Meetup, January 21st at the UW Bothell. These are not real, but I did create them just to have interesting topics, and they have nice, juicy descriptions that semantic search can jump onto. Can you help me find commute options from my house to this event? All right, so it knows that it's going to be at this time. It's going to find nearby ferry terminals, and I am somewhat near this intersection in Port Orchard. And so it's going to find Bremerton and Southworth as my two local ferry terminals. It's going to determine how long it's going to take for me to drive all the way to that Bothell location. And it's going to give me a distance of 73 miles. Oof. And then I get 77 cents per mileage for expensing. So sometimes this is really kind of nice for me. So it would actually cost $56 to Sweet Elastic for me to go there. And it's also going to look at ferry times. So it's going to look up the Bremerton to Seattle schedule. It's going to give a table of all their times. It's going to figure out the drive from, looks like the Bremerton ferry terminal from my house. And all these things matter too. Sometimes there's traffic, sometimes there's not. It's going to look up from Seattle to actual Bothell, so it's going to add that to my total time. And then it's going to look up the cost of driving from Seattle to Bremerton. And I believe it's going to be around, it's $19.70. Sometimes $20 is worth my sanity and not driving around the 5. Sometimes it's not. And so it's going to call these for all the different options. And then we have 3 different options. I can drive, I can leave at 4:50, get there at 6:30. It'll take an hour and 18 minutes. It'll cost $56.34. No ferry, but it's the longest drive, but it's also the most flexible. I can take the Bremerton ferry at 3:45. There'll be a total travel of 2 hours and 45 minutes, but it's only going to be $41. And then, most interestingly, if I drive to Southworth and then take the ferry to Fauntleroy and then drive, I will be disappeared. No. So they will pay me $28.51 if I take that ferry. I don't know what happened there. That is the slight inconsistency of Sweet Claude. So, and then, yeah, I couldn't retrieve the fare. That's fair enough. Not quite sure what happened there, but that is an option. What are some options on going back home? So now we're going to look at return options, and it's going to see the end of my event at 8:30, and it's going to figure out the drive times, the ferry times, and it's going to try its darndest to get the cost. I am actually really interested to see what it sees with the cost. When you're getting out of a concert at like 11:45 p.m., you do not want to just play on your phone and figure out navigation. This basically will tell you, just drive to the Seattle ferry terminal. Have a nice little snooze on the ferry home. And I gave it a prompting instruction to give me a table, otherwise it would give me the most obnoxious, long, bulleted list with emojis. Just give it to me. Just give it to me plain. And it looks like we have pretty much the exact same thing, only at different times. But what I really appreciate are the different times that I'll have to wait and how long the travel time is. So it looks like I might just take the 9:05 ferry from Seattle. So that would probably be better. I could drive around, but honestly, it'll be nice to just sit there and sit next to the water. And then it gives me some notes in case it wants to be a little bit more helpful. And that's it. That is the MCP server that integrates with Elasticsearch to look up my events. And then with that in its context, it's actually creating commuting options. And you can do this, of course, on your phone as well if you have your files hosted somewhere and it's linked to here via URL. All right, so what else can I do? Well, because I am Elastic, I also have a huge hand in observability and telemetry, so I can tack on a lot of observability to just see how many tokens I'm munching on this. I can add more public transit options. I can send it to my phone. I can create a full agent system out of this, whatever I really want. So this is just the beginning, and this is a great way to start a structure for a full agentic system. And now I believe we are ready for any questions you might have.
So I'm just curious, when you built this thing with the LLM versus just coding it in a conventional way, was this just because that's the way you prefer to work, or do you get like operational benefits once it's finished by doing it the LLM way? I see the calendar integration is pretty useful. Anything else?
That's a good question. This was a snapshot of my first foray into building out an MCP. So you can build an MCP client alongside your server, but it just required more work, whereas MCP server connected to an LLM app just gives you a faster turnaround. I also was building this in Windsurf for a while, and what was really awesome was iterating on this and then having the actual LLM within Windsurf have access to the MCP tool. So I'll ask it, hey, can you see this ferry route? It's like, no, we need to add this. So I think it's a really good way to start prototyping and getting it up and running. And then from there, you kind of build out your client. And then from there, you connect it to your LLM.
Thanks for a great talk. I'm also a Kitsap County ferry commuter, and I recognize the emotional landscape. One thing I was curious about, you'd mentioned one of the inputs into this was kind of your vibe or your mood about what kind of commute you wanted to face. I was wondering if you had experimented with like having Claude interview you to see what you were up to, what you felt like, or if that, if there's other, is that just kind of a fantasy use of this kind of thing?
I think that's extremely valid. In parallel, I'm actually creating a MCP server that is recording verbal accounts of physical symptoms and storing it for a larger data set of like symptoms over time to track silent illnesses. I always tell it, ask me questions if you want, and it will, but I found that within this specific context, it was just getting off track. I like it. I've kind of found my sweet spot of giving you 3 things, like OneDrive, 2 Ferry, because I will decide as soon as I see them what I feel. But I do believe kind of sharing your vibe, your mood, how you're feeling that day will actually influence it, but I decided not to get into that very ethereal, almost woo section of MCP servers. Maybe I'll create a framework for that, woo.py.
Very impressive. How long did it take you to build this out? And do you have any tips on instructing tools like Windsurf, Cursor to get started and iterating less?
Yeah. To just absolutely talk up the accolades of fast MCP, I just can't say enough about how great they are. They have an excellent tutorial section. They have real-world examples, so you can actually pull down from their repo bigger examples. But this is what you need to actually get up and running, to get started. You will install the fast MCP package. But the way that they write it, I think, is really great, the way they present it. I was an educator before I was an engineer, so I really appreciate all of the things that they include that you are going to have questions about. All the way down to, which I think is actually a really interesting thing, is authentication. I think that's extremely important to have because you're giving a lot of power to your MCP servers and your agentic setup, so you need to have strong authentication and authorization. And the way I did this is that I had a long conversation with Claude. I made a plan. I read through a lot of the documentation of FastMCP, and then FastMCP has something called LLMs.txt. Has anybody played with these? It's a new movement All the kids are doing it. It is just a huge markdown that completely explains the topic that the website is of, and then you feed this to your LLM. So this is the fast MCP LLMs.txt. Would you read this? Heck no. Would you feed this to Claude? Yes. You feed this to that LLM, it is now a genius, and it will now help you. So I recommend looking up the LLMs.txt of any current technology, and you should find some really good, helpful solutions for your LLM to help you along as you develop.
All right, that's all the time we have for questions. Let's thank our speaker again.
Thank you very much.